Hi, this is Dr. Pulsifer, and I'm going to try to describe, especially for the benefit of new game designers, why game design is never-ending compromise. And I might get a little bit strident by the end, but one of my functions as I see it is to destroy the delusions that people are under when they're thinking about or starting to design games. And this is one of those cases. So, can games be all things to all people? Of course not. Possibly the biggest mistake made by game designers, but especially by beginning game designers, is to try to be all things to all people, to try to make a game that satisfies everyone. This is not going to happen. Name any game you want, and you can find at least 1 million, and likely far more gamers who dislike it or would if they had a chance to know it. Life is a compromise. So it's not surprising that game design is a compromise. Unfortunately, it's not unusual to encounter people, especially young people, who somewhere got the notion that in life you can have it all. These are usually people who have listened to too many advertisements, the triumph of capitalism, and who have not dealt with the real adult world for very long, if at all. Every decision you make, of course, renders some things unavailable to you, perhaps forever. When you play a game, especially a contemporary single-player video game, as a player it may feel like you can have it all. That's because you can do it over and over until you see what you want, you get what you want, and because someone, the game designer, has already made a lot of decisions before you. And video game saves allow all this to happen. But we don't have saves in real life. Also, the designers don't feel like you can have it all because they know that game design is a compromise. So what a designer gets in a game when they finish it is rarely what they intended when they started out. Warren Spector, one of the most well-known video game designers, once said, quote, "One of the things about making games, at least for me, is you start out with a vision of what something can be, and you close your eyes and you imagine this thing. A couple of years later, you open your eyes and the thing you created could be wonderful, but it's not like the thing you imagined originally. Deus Ex is the one and only time I ever opened my eyes after 3 years and said, 'Holy cow, this is what I imagined.' And the reason for that is all the compromises even the best game designers must make. Many of the compromises are because some things necessarily exclude other things. So many game characteristics can be seen as a spectrum with extremes at one end and then lots in the middle. And the more you lean toward one side, the less you can lean toward the other. For example, simple and complex. You can't have a game that's both. Short and long. Games with player agency and games with designer control. There are dozens of these spectra. And you can't be all things, you have to compromise in some way. A rule of thumb that can apply to games. Short, simple to play, richly detailed. You can have 2 out of 3 in board games. This derives from project management saying on budget, on time, on spec, you can have 2 out of 3. And from my network saying, computer networking, fast, long distance, cheap, you can have 2 out of 3. Spector says he managed it once, although we don't know how much money it cost, but it's a great rarity. Now consider also this, the ultimate expressions of story, which are novels, plays, and movies, control what the consumer does, sees, hears. That's the opposite of what the game designer does, where the player is part of the process. It is what the puzzle designer often does, which is why puzzles and story often go together. Now, somebody commented at one point about one of my videos and said something about exactly what this medium should be trying to explore. And I said, should be? Who says? There is no should that can be applied to everything and everyone because tastes are so vastly different among gamers. He called me narrow-minded, and I said, no, there's not narrow-minded, it's just different points of view. Now, some of those points of view make more sense when compared to the real world than others do. So, given the idea that you and your game can't be everything to all people, where are you going to be? Yes, it may be artificial to separate almost anything into two distinct camps, but it illustrates the extremes that some people go to. You can be in the middle, but then in a sense you're, for example, sometimes a game designer and sometimes a fiction writer, a compromise. What if you refuse to compromise? Well, very likely you're going to fail, or you may get lucky once, like Spectre. And keep in mind, Spectre spent 3 years working on the same game with a large crew. In general, just as there is no room for perfectionism in game design, there's no room for those who cannot compromise. It's two sides of the same coin, really. Unfortunately, folks, the world isn't what you want it to be. It is what it is. You have to learn to accept it and work with it. As they say, life is hard and then you die. Sorry. Thanks for listening.